Welcome back to PodX Studio. Today's deep dive is going to be especially helpful for anyone who's new to current affairs.
Yeah.
And wants to understand what's happening in India. We've got a stack of recent news and analysis here, and we're going to break it all down in a way that makes sense, even if you're just starting to follow these topics.
It's like a crash course on what matters most.
Exactly.
With a special focus on the kinds of events and issues that often come up in exams like the UPSC.
So let's jump right in. The first topic we're going to tackle is India's role on the global stage.
Okay.
It's a pretty hot topic these days, with India making headlines for all sorts of reasons.
What's fascinating is that we're seeing India being pulled in two directions at once. On the one hand, there's this growing relationship with the so-called global north countries like the U.S. and those in Europe.
Right. And we see that playing out in things like defense deals and collaborations on technology.
Precisely. But at the same time, India is also trying to strengthen ties with the global south developing nations in Africa, Latin America, and other parts of Asia.
So looking, India is trying to walk a tightrope, balancing these relationships with different groups of countries that have different priorities.
Exactly. And that's where things get really interesting.
Okay.
Because it's not just about making friends. It's about choosing what kind of role India wants to play in the world.
Okay, so let's unpack this a bit.
Yeah.
What are some of the key events that illustrate this balancing act?
Okay.
I'm thinking about things like the Aero India show, where we saw India showcasing its military might alongside countries like the US and Russia.
The Aero India show is a great example. It's a chance for India to show off its growing defense capabilities and also to shop around for the latest technology. The fact that both the US and Russia were there, each trying to woo India, really highlights how important India has become as a strategic partner.
And it's not just about buying weapons, right? We also saw India signing defense agreements with the UK, focusing on things like joint development and technology transfer.
That's right. These agreements signal a shift towards deeper collaboration. It's not just about transactions anymore. It's about working together to develop new capabilities. This is especially significant with the UK deal because it goes beyond just buying and selling equipment.
Yeah.
It's about creating a long-term partnership for research development and even manufacturing.
Wow.
This kind of collaboration allows India to not just acquire technology, but to build its own expertise and potentially become a major exporter of defense equipment in the future.
So these defense deals tell us a lot about India's ambitions in terms of military power.
Yes.
But what about the global south angle?
Sure.
What's happening there?
Well, one of the key areas where India is engaging with the global south is through development assistance.
Okay.
India is providing financial aid and technical expertise to countries in Africa, Asia, and Latin America, helping them build infrastructure, improve healthcare, and develop their economies.
And this isn't just about charity, right?
Right.
It's also about building strategic alliances and expanding India's influence in these regions.
You're absolutely right. India sees these partnerships as a way to create win-win situations. By helping other developing countries grow, India is also creating new markets for its own products and services.
Right.
It's a smart strategy that benefits everyone involved.
And it plays into this idea of India being a bridge between the global north and south. It's like India is using its own experience as a developing country to connect with these other nations and help them navigate the challenges of globalization.
Precisely. And this is something that sets India apart from other major powers. India has a unique perspective and a history of solidarity with developing nations that allows it to build trust and foster genuine partnerships.
Okay, so we've talked about defense and development, but there's another big piece of the puzzle when it comes to India's global role: trade.
And that's where things get a little more complicated.
Right, because we can't talk about India's trade relationships without mentioning the elephant in the room: the U.S.-India tariff tussle. It seems like this has been going on forever.
It definitely feels that way. The U.S. and India have had a long and sometimes bumpy history when it comes to trade.
Yeah.
And tariffs are just one symptom of that larger dynamic.
So for those who haven't been following this saga, can you give us a quick rundown of what's going on with these tariffs?
Sure. Essentially, the U.S. has imposed tariffs on certain goods imported from India, including steel and aluminum. This means that Indian companies have to pay extra taxes to sell their products in the U.S. market, which makes them less competitive.
And this has had a real impact on India's exports, right?
Uh-huh.
I remember reading about how Indian steel producers have been struggling to find buyers in the U.S. because of these tariffs.
That's right. The tariffs have definitely hurt Indian exporters.
Okay.
And it's not just about steel and aluminum. There have been disputes over other products as well.
So what's India's response been? Has it just taken this lying down?
Not exactly. India has retaliated by imposing its own tariffs on U.S. products. It's a classic tit-for-tat trade war.
Right, and that's where things get tricky,
Yeah.
because these tariffs hurt both sides. Consumers end up paying higher prices,
Right.
and businesses lose out on potential sales.
Exactly. And that's why it's so important to find a way to resolve these trade disputes.
But it's not just about economics.
Right.
There's also a political dimension to this. These tariffs are a way for both countries to flex their muscles and assert their interests.
Absolutely. Trade is often used as a tool of foreign policy. And in this case, it's clear that both the U.S. and India are trying to send a message to each other.
So it's a high-stakes game, and it's hard to predict how it's going to play out.
One thing's for sure, it's a situation that anyone following India's global role needs to keep a close eye on.
Okay, so we've covered a lot of ground here, from defense deals to development assistance to trade wars. It's clear that India is a major player on the global stage.
Yeah.
And its actions have consequences for the entire world.
And it's only going to get more interesting from here.
Well, that's a bit daunting, but also exciting.
Yeah.
I'm definitely curious to see what happens next.
Me too.
Yeah.
But before we get too far ahead of ourselves, let's shift gears for a moment and talk about something that's happening closer to home. India's internal dynamics. India might be making waves internationally, but things aren't exactly calm on the domestic front either.
Yeah.
There are some pretty intense debates happening within India right now that are shaping its future just as much as its foreign policy.
That's a great point. It's easy to get caught up in the global headlines.
Right.
But what's happening inside India is just as important, especially for those of us trying to understand the bigger picture.
Right.
What are some of the key issues that are dominating the domestic scene right now?
Well, one of the most contentious debates revolves around the Uniform Civil Code, or UCC.
Okay.
It's an issue that touches upon some very sensitive topics like religion, personal freedoms, and the role of the state.
Okay. I have to admit the UCC is one of those topics that I find a little confusing.
Sure.
Can you break it down for us in simple terms? What's it all about? And why is it causing so much controversy?
Absolutely. In essence, the UCC aims to create a single set of laws governing personal matters, like marriage, divorce, inheritance, and adoption for all citizens regardless of their religion.
Okay.
Right now, different religious communities in India have their own personal laws based on their respective scriptures and traditions.
So the idea is to have one law for everyone instead of different laws for different religious groups.
Exactly.
I can see how that could be seen as a way to promote equality and fairness, but I also imagine it's stepping on some toes.
You hit the nail on the head. Proponents of the UCC argue that it would help eliminate discrimination and promote gender equality. For instance, under some current personal laws, women might have fewer rights than men when it comes to inheritance or divorce.
Yeah,
The UCC aims to level the playing field.
that makes sense. But what are the arguments against it? Why are some people so fiercely opposed to the UCC?
Well, the main criticism is that it infringes on religious freedom. Many religious communities feel that their personal laws are an integral part of their faith and identity, and they see the UCC as an attempt by the state to impose a uniform set of values on a diverse population.
So it's a clash between the principle of equality before the law and the right to practice one's religion freely.
Exactly.
That's a tough one.
It certainly is. And it's a debate that goes beyond just legal technicalities. It taps into deeper questions about what it means to be Indian, how to balance individual rights with the needs of a diverse society, and the role of religion in public life. It's a conversation that India has been grappling with for decades, and it's not going away anytime soon.
It sounds like a complex issue with strong arguments on both sides.
It is.
It definitely highlights the challenges of governing a country as diverse as India.
Exactly. It's a balancing act that requires careful consideration and sensitivity to different perspectives.
Well, I think we've done a good job of unpacking the UCC debate, at least in broad strokes. But there's another domestic issue that I wanted to touch upon, one that raises some profound questions about the nature of justice and democracy. We talked earlier about the Supreme Court case that dealt with the question of whether convicted persons can return to lawmaking.
Yes. That case sparked quite a bit of controversy and debate. At the heart of the issue is the Representation of the People Act,
Right.
which currently disqualifies individuals who have been convicted of certain crimes from holding elected office.
And the Supreme Court ultimately upheld this provision, right?
They did. But the arguments presented during the case delved into some fundamental principles. On one side, you have the argument for upholding the integrity of our democracy and ensuring that those who represent us are held to the highest ethical standards.
Right. The idea that if you've been convicted of a serious crime, you've broken the public trust and shouldn't be allowed to hold a position of power, it makes sense on a gut level.
It does. But the opposing argument focuses on the concept of reformative justice, the idea that people can change and deserve a second chance. Proponents of this view argue that once someone has served their sentence, they should be allowed to fully reintegrate into society, including participating in the political process.
So it's a question of balancing punishment with rehabilitation.
Precisely.
And of course, there's no easy answer.
Exactly. And the case highlights how our legal and political systems are constantly grappling with these complex questions of justice, forgiveness, and redemption. It's a debate that reflects the evolving values of our society and forces us to confront difficult choices about who we are and what kind of future we want to build.
It's definitely a lot to think about. And it's a reminder that even though these legal cases might seem dry and technical, they often touch upon some of the most fundamental aspects of human nature and our social contract.
Couldn't agree more. And it brings us back to this idea of India as a country in constant flux, constantly evolving and grappling with these complex issues that have no easy answers.
It's almost like watching a giant social experiment unfold in real time.
And it's a reminder that understanding India requires not just looking at the headlines, but delving into the nuances, the debates, the competing perspectives that shape its trajectory.
Well said. And speaking of perspectives, there's one more angle I wanted to explore before we wrap up this deep dive. It's something we touched upon earlier, but I think it deserves a closer look. We talked about India's efforts to boost its domestic manufacturing through initiatives like Make in India. But there's another side to this story that I find really intriguing. India's push to become a leader in indigenous technology.
That's a great observation. And it's a trend that's gaining momentum across various sectors, from defense to space exploration to renewable energy.
I'm thinking specifically about the Aero India show again. Remember how HAL, the Indian aerospace company, announced that they had renamed their upgraded trainer aircraft Yashas? It seemed like more than just a name change. It felt symbolic somehow.
It absolutely was. The name Yashas, which means glory in Sanskrit, reflects a growing sense of pride and confidence in India's technological capabilities. It's a statement to the world that India is not just a consumer of technology, but an innovator in its own right.
So this renaming is part of a larger narrative about India's aspirations to become a technological powerhouse.
Precisely. And it's not just about national pride. There are practical reasons behind this push for indigenous technology as well.
Like what?
Well, for one thing, it reduces dependence on foreign suppliers. If India can develop its own critical technologies, it becomes less vulnerable to external pressures and can chart its own course. This is especially important in areas like defense, where reliance on other countries can be a strategic liability.
That makes sense.
Yeah.
And it also creates jobs and boosts the economy, right?
Absolutely. Investing in research and development, building high-tech manufacturing facilities, and fostering a culture of innovation all contribute to economic growth and create opportunities for skilled workers.
So it's a win-win situation. India gets to enhance its technological prowess, strengthen its strategic autonomy, and boost its economy all at the same time.
Exactly. And this push for indigenous technology is also aligned with India's goals on the global stage. As India seeks to become a leading power, it needs to have a strong foundation in science and technology.
It's all starting to come together now. We've talked about India's global ambitions, its complex domestic challenges, and its drive to become a technological leader. It's clear that India is at a pivotal moment in its history, and the choices it makes today will have a profound impact on its future.
And those choices are being shaped by a multitude of factors, from geopolitical shifts to demographic trends to technological advancements. It's a fascinating and dynamic landscape full of opportunities and challenges.
Well, I think we've done a pretty good job of unpacking some of those complexities and highlighting what's at stake for India. For anyone who's new to current affairs, this deep dive has hopefully provided a solid foundation for understanding India's evolving role in the world.
I hope so. And I encourage everyone to continue exploring these issues, digging deeper and forming their own opinions.
Because ultimately, it's an informed and engaged citizenry that will determine the future of India and indeed the world.
Well said. And on that note, I think it's time for us to wrap up this deep dive.
It's been a fascinating journey. Thanks for joining us in the PodX studio today.
It's been my pleasure.
And to all our listeners out there, stay tuned for more exciting deep dives in future episodes.